Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to do the Unpopular Opinions 2.0 tag. This is actually an original tag that I created a few years ago. It is kind of taking the concept of the Unpopular Opinions tag and then just kind of doing a few other separate type of questions that are related to but different from those. I'll have all the questions in the description bar down below, and feel free to pick any one of these and let me know what your answers would be, or if you find you have something to add to anything I say today, feel free to let me know. I would love to see your thoughts on these things. I do have a tendency to do the Unpopular Opinions tag around the middle of the year and this one around the end. I think it's kind of a fun way to wrap up some of the opinions that leave us feeling a little bit outside of what everybody else seems to be thinking and feeling within a given year. So I like to kind of recheck in. But all that said, let's go ahead and jump into it. The first question today is a genre great that you don't get the hype for. And as I was just saying, I have a tendency to do one of these around the middle of the year and one of these around the end. So I am going to be sticking to books that I have picked up within this year. I'll start with one that is, I think, an unpopular opinion for a great of the genre within fantasy and then also within fantasy romance. So for within fantasy romance, I actually just did a whole video dedicated to the staples of fantasy romance that don't really work for me, and I'll have that video linked if you'd like to watch that. But I mentioned The Knight and the Moth. I am surprised for a few reasons that this one has become a staple, but as far as why it didn't work for me personally, I have just found that consistently this author's writing style is pretty, and I feel like it should work. And I have said similar things before about Adrienne Young's books, and I kind of think I feel similarly about both, where I appreciate the atmosphere, and I keep feeling like one of these days, one of these authors' books is going to work for me. This is truer for Adrienne Young because I've read more of their works, but it still stands for this one, where The Knight and the Moth, I feel like I should like it, especially because it feels more romantic leaning than fantasy romance, so it feels like it's more of a blend of fantasy and romance as opposed to more romance first, and that tends to be what I prefer. But even still, I found I wasn't as gripped by the world building and the lore as I was wanting. It all sounded cool in theory, but then as I was reading about it, I was like, I kind of want more of that, and it's like we're getting enough of it to turn the page and to keep up with the plot, but I wanted more because I feel like the concepts were there, and I don't dislike the writing. So I'm almost surprised for myself that this didn't work. And on that note, sticking to now fantasy, and a genre great for fantasy, and thinking I was really gonna like this. If you've kept up with some of my reading from this year, you might even already know what I'm gonna say. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I like the writing. I do not like Simon. I don't like how the world is delivered to us. Luna just grunted if you heard her, so apparently she isn't a fan of that either. You know what? The wolf. I like the wolf in this. So the Luna Bear equivalent in the story is, I'm a fan. I made a whole video dedicated to how Simon has pretty much ruined this series for me. I can't stand him. I can't stand any protagonist like this either. I don't like this idea that just because a character is young and just because they're sometimes a little clueless, or because sometimes they're new to the world, so they have big emotions and big reactions and they don't have anything to kind of remind them like, hey, it's going to work itself out, or they don't have the ability basically to self-soothe because they don't have the experience of doing so. And I understand all that's true of people who are younger because they genuinely haven't lived as much life. However, there are ways to write those characters where they are not the most grating, annoying idiots. And that's what Simon is. He's so frustrating. And randomly, like out of nowhere, he'll just say some off-color stuff about women. And I know that it's based somewhat in historical times, but this kid just like traipses about the castle and he's constantly hardly doing anything, and I'm like, well, if it was kind of more so rooted in medieval times, I feel like this kid wouldn't be able to get away with being such a brat all the time. It's not like he's some important person's child. I mean, maybe he is, right? Because he's gotta be. He's the main character of this epic fantasy story, so he must be important somehow. But, you know, he's not known to be the king's son or something where you're like, he's not a Joffrey type or something like that. He just sucks. I just can't stand him. So, on behalf of young people everywhere, you are not a Simon. I know that. I know there are a lot of people who go through a lot when they're younger, and a lot of us can look back and be like, wow, I was stupid when I was young. But I'm like, you know what? I don't think a lot of young people are that bad. When I was teaching, I'm like, a lot of these kids are great. Kids are awesome. Teenagers can be great too. There's a lot of really brilliant, wonderful people. And yeah, maybe they have some stronger emotions sometimes. I can't stand Simon. Like I said, I already have a whole video dedicated to it. I probably don't need to rant that much more. An adaptation you wish was never made. There haven't really been many from this year that I can point to, so I am kind of pulling from the past. Slash what's to come. I'm gonna mention two things. One that already came out that I never watched, but I have reasons. And then one that's coming out that I don't plan to watch, also because I have reasons. And that would be the new HBO Harry Potter, that's the one that's to come, and also Rings of Power on Amazon. Why are we milking these things to death when there are so many other amazing stories that could be told? I recognize that sometimes fantasy fans are very annoying and hard to please when it comes to adaptations, myself included. I can be very picky, but also I know that sometimes, like let's say a newer work has come out and all of a sudden it's already got rights that are being sold and people are already getting started on adaptation. And when that happens, sometimes fantasy fans will go, I can't believe that's getting an adaptation before Mistborn. You know, like sometimes as if somehow they're like all connected and these studios are looking at every single work and they're like, you know what? I'm going to pick this one first. It's not like they're cutting in line. It's just how it works sometimes. But I recognize that sometimes that's a response. And then other times, something older, like Wheel of Time, for example, they will make an adaptation for it. And then sometimes we go, okay, can we just like stop with all the older stuff because it's dated and they're going to change it to try to fit now. And it feels sometimes like there's no pleasing us. And then we also complain about how stuff looks. I do think that there's a lot of hoopla that can happen as a result. But we don't need more Lord of the Rings. You know what's really good? The original Lord of the Rings trilogy. They're really good. They're still some of the best fantasy adaptations we've ever gotten. The soundtrack is great. The cast is great. The set was great. It's still a really good film. Why are we making this weird... I don't understand, and I'm not interested in it, and maybe it was amazing, but I'm like, I don't care. I'd rather just go back and watch the movies. And then with the new Harry Potter one, why is this being made? And I know for some people they're like, oh, it's for like a new generation, and I'm just like, no, it's not. It's to make money. I wish that we cared more about telling good stories and that we didn't need to remake the same one over and over and over again. I don't like it. And I understand sometimes when things are really dated. I'm going to use a video game as an example. So Final Fantasy VII, I did play the original. It is borderline unplayable. It's pretty hideous. And yes, the story is off the walls and it's so intense and it's so different and gripping and interesting. And I am glad that they took modern technology and they've remade it. Do I think they needed to split it up so much? No. Do I think they needed to change some of the plot stuff? No. So I have some criticisms. However, I do think it makes sense when something is really, really old or was made at a time where the technology was completely different than it is now. I can understand sometimes why you would want to change that. But in the case of these sorts of stories, I'm just like, we already have them. Lord of the Rings is already really well loved, and plenty of people still go watch Harry Potter. Like, it's on TV all the time. People have the movies. People keep collecting stuff. You go to the bookstore and there's a whole display for Harry Potter. You can't go to like any fandom place and not see that stuff. Do we really need another one? I do want to say I feel bad for the kids that are in this show. I wish them the best. I just don't care about this adaptation. Question number 3. A book or series you have to fight back your inner snob because you kind of think people just don't get it. This doesn't happen, I would say, all that often, and there was a book I picked up earlier this year, A Winter's Promise, and I kind of used that book as an example as to why I personally, as a reviewer, choose not to look at reviews before I review things. But I made an exception for that book to show the way, or I should add, not only before I read something, but before I've had the chance to sit down and talk about it and actually do a review. Even between finishing the book and doing the review, I don't like looking at reviews or seeing other people's thoughts because I do think it can impact how you review it and what you say, and I, as much as possible, do not want to engage in accidental intellectual plagiarism, especially because I make money on YouTube, so I just don't want to ever make money on what I feel like are other people's thoughts. I made an exception for this one video to show how much I can so easily start to want to talk about what other people have said rather than just what I would say. One of the things in A Winter's Promise is that, well, there's a number of things that I felt the need to comment on. But one of the things were people saying, and this isn't really a you just don't get it. I was just kind of like, what? The characters in the books live on what are basically like these floating islands. And there are these ancestor spirits that are kind of like, almost like gods of these floating islands. And each of these floating islands has developed their own culture, technology, ways of living, and with the main character where they start off, they refer to the other people on this island as their cousins, and they aren't literally cousins. I mean, you could decide that like way back, if they're all descended from this one ancestor spirit, then you could decide like in some way everybody on this island is related, I guess. But they refer to each other as cousins. And this character has, as much as possible, pushed off getting married. She keeps having these possible arranged marriages come up, and she's found ways to get out of them. And it's finally come about where she can't escape it anymore, and they're actually going to have her marry somebody from a different island. And when she's talking at the beginning of the story to a family member, they're like, well, you had a chance to be with one of your cousins, and then you turned that down. And they're not literally referring to her cousin, but I saw some people that are like, this book has incest. And I was like, I don't think that's what that was. And then this is not specific from this year, but I'm going to use it as a jumping off point, I suppose, to a topic. So I remember once in talking about the manga series, Hat Atelier, which I love and I think is fantastic. And I've buddy read it with friends of mine, like Gavin from Oh, that's not his channel name. Gavin Reads It All is his channel name now. He's changed it. Gavin Reads It All. He has a Gavin Reads All the Manga side channel where he talks about manga. So I reread the series and talked about it with him. And my husband has read it and he loves it. My friend Enrique has read it and he really likes it. A lot of my friends have picked up Hat Atelier and we've had really great conversations because there are a lot of really great thematic elements in that story. I highly recommend it. I have for years been recommending it. There's going to be an anime soon. I'm so excited. But I remember somebody, and I wasn't mad at them by any means, but I also just kind of want to bounce off of this, where they're like, I tried it, but it just feels like it's for girls. And I don't know what about it gives that feeling, because the main characters initially are little girls, but they're not the only characters. There's a lot of adults in the story as well. And some of the adults who are looking after the girls that you could argue get their own perspective depending on how you look at it. But some of them are men. But I also feel like if all the children were boys, would they still feel like it's just for girls? But even so, I don't love this mindset that the gender of a protagonist dictates who the target audience is for. I understand sometimes thematically there are certain themes that are more likely to appeal to or for readers to resonate with those themes when it's a certain gender. So and again, what I'm about to even use as an example isn't specific to women, but just kind of an example. Something like domestic abuse can of course happen to men, but statistically a lot of times women they are the ones that go through that. Or if you're looking at a story that's historical fiction where women maybe didn't have the means to leave, and so they kind of they didn't have a way to get out of that situation, and there being all sorts of psychological reasons why it's difficult in the first place. So sometimes people pick up those stories and maybe they've experienced it, or their mother experienced it, or their grandmother experienced it, and so they connect with it on that level. That doesn't mean though that it's for girls or for women, because again, men can experience that too, but also it's good for people to understand each other by reading about things that are potentially more likely to happen to people different from them. And I'm using gender as an example just because that was the thing that kind of prompted this, was somebody being like, it feels like it's for girls. But this can happen with all sorts of things that make us unique and different and who we are. It doesn't just have to be like gender as an example. But overall, I understand again that certain things maybe might appeal to certain demographics because of things that they're more likely to experience in life, and thus it might affect how much they connect with something. But I think this idea that something is exclusively for any one demographic, and thus if you are outside of it, it's not for you, I disagree with that mindset. So I think it's good to branch out and read things that aren't just rooted in the kinds of experiences that we have had. Question 4, a book or series you're tired of everyone hating on. Okay, this is not new. This is not something I'm tired of people hating on from just this year. I just want to say it still happens, and that would be A Court of Thorns and Roses. Every now and then there will be a channel that's new, and they kind of try to start off their channel by hating on ACOTAR. And I don't know, it just feels a little bit like you see how popular this thing is, and so you want to appeal to people by seeming as though you are more discerning as a reader, or you're more critical as a reader by not liking this thing that's super hyped, or maybe you feel like you're really funny, and so you're going to use this as an example because it's really popular, and so you're going to make fun of it. It's starting to feel very inauthentic. I understand some people genuinely will pick up a hyped thing and they'll be like, what? Why is this so popular? Or they'll pick up something and they genuinely are very, very amused by the writing or certain lines or the dialogue, and they want to talk about it. I'm not by any means saying that that doesn't have a place, but I don't like inauthentic approaches to reviewing books. So at this point, I think there are plenty of people that are still giving it a try because they genuinely want to give it a try and it's not working. I think that's different. But I do think that there are still some people out there that are picking up ACOTAR with the intention of mocking it, hoping it will get them views, and that's not really for me. Next up, a character you don't get the hype for. I checked out Attack on Titan for the first time last year. And it kind of carried me up through close to the end of the year, and then I had to, recover. I was, for a while, my whole Instagram was just Attack on Titan stuff, and it was through that I discovered that people like the character Flock, and I was like, what? Why? He is possibly my least favorite character. Flock and another character whose name I will not say in case you haven't checked it out. I don't want to say too much, but there are some characters that you kind of go back and forth with hating, and then the way they're written, it kind of, you shift and your feelings change and all these things. Or there's some characters that do horrible things, but they're so interesting in how they're written. So as a character, the writing is good, even if you don't like them personally. I hated Flock the moment he showed up. I was like, this guy sucks. And then I hated him ever since, and he continued to suck. And some people are like, Flock knew what was up, and I'm like, are you serious? Even if you agreed with him, he still sucks. Please tell me some of you know what I'm talking about. I know this isn't as much the anime manga space, and I talk about that stuff over on my side channel, so maybe this is the wrong place to mention this character, but I didn't know people loved them, and I was shocked at the amount. It's not just that some people, you know how people will say about a certain character in Berserk or a certain character in Stormlight Archive, they'll be like, so-and-so did nothing wrong, even though they very clearly did, right? This is a character where some people will say that about them, and I'm just kind of like, I mean, yeah, they did. Yeah? What are you talking about? Lose all coherent thought and speech, and I just become like a fish out of water, just gaping. I don't understand. I mean, that's the best way, is a character you don't get the hype for. I don't get the hype for this character. I really don't. A book or series everyone wants an adaptation for it, but you don't. Okay, so two things. First off, I know The Devils is apparently going to be made into a movie, and I think it'll work as a movie, but it will work as a movie that I don't want to watch. And then Elden Ring. I like Elden Ring as a game. I don't need it to be made into a movie. Alex Garland? I know a lot of people are like, well, if he's behind it, it's probably going to be pretty good. And I'm just like, I don't want Elden Ring adapted into a movie. I think it works best as a game. I like it as a game. And I guess sometimes I wish, it kind of ties back to my thing about Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. Not everything needs to be adapted into another form. Sometimes I think it's a great way to get more people invested. But I'm like, who's going to go see an Elden Ring movie and then be like, I might need to play that game now? Like, that's not going to happen. Maybe it'll happen. I guess I shouldn't speak so confidently. But isn't there some interesting stat about gaming being more popular than other mediums combined? So a little bit, I'm like, I guess I really don't understand wanting to make it a movie specifically. I could kind of understand a show if you really want to dive into some of the lore, of which there is plenty to choose from with Elden Ring. And I'm not even saying that I don't think that this individual could do a good job and make a good movie. I'm not saying that. I just don't understand why, especially because it's A24, which I think likes to get props for doing more kind of indie-like films. And in the past, they've taken chances on things that aren't necessarily IPs like other studios will do. But in this case, I'm just like, Elden Ring, Dark Souls, all those things are pretty huge. They're pretty well known, and gamers make up huge portions of the population. So it doesn't feel like it's bringing life to something that maybe people wouldn't have really known about before, or maybe don't reach the same level of popularity. Like, books tend to not reach the same level of popularity as movies and games. So I think it's kind of different when you're talking about a book being adapted. That can really do a lot, especially because in comparison to like actors or people involved in other fields, authors tend to not make even close to the amount of money that people do in these other fields. So the more that we can hype something up and potentially do other mediums, I'm like, I don't know, I feel like that's tends to be a good thing for the author, because they deserve so much for all the work that they've put in, and they tend to, I don't think, get compensated enough. But when it comes to Elden Ring, I was starting to say, and I'll complete this thought, I could kind of understand it as a show. I could kind of understand dissecting, when, like, everything to do with the different magic users, because there's, I don't need to go into detail, but there's the ones that with, like, Renala and hers, and then there's, like, an offshoot, and then at some point they kind of, like, went to war with each other. And I'm like, that could be a really cool, amazing TV show. That could be really cool. But a live action movie, maybe I'll watch it, and I will try to give it a fair shot. But I think I'm going to sit there being like, I'd rather just go home and play Elden Ring again. So I'm one of the few people that I feel like I'm alone. I don't know. I don't want an Elden Ring movie. And I also don't even know what they're going to adapt. That'll be really interesting to see. I can't imagine they're going to actually adapt what plays out in the game. I feel like it has to be something with the lore. Now on to the last question. A book or series you think people have bias toward and don't really love or hate as much as they claim. I think nowadays Sanderson has become so popular, and I do think sometimes what I was describing about ACOTAR, where people try to set themselves apart by saying like they don't like it, or then some people might want to say they like it, so they feel like they have more opportunities, especially because Sanderson is an author that's oftentimes very close with his fans. I've interviewed Sanderson before. Other people, he's very willing to talk to his fans and do interviews and do conventions and things like that. So I feel like sometimes people want, especially if they care more about views or they care more about appearing like authorities in the space, I think sometimes people will say certain things about Sanderson that come across more favorably, or they'll kind of ride the line where they will be somewhat critical but then also praise, and maybe they're not being as critical, or maybe they're not praising as much as they would if it were a different author. I think that in both scenarios it can happen. I think sometimes people can want to set themselves apart as like, oh, I don't like Sanderson, that basic fantasy, or, which I'm not saying it is basic, but I think sometimes there's that camp, and then I think sometimes there's the camp that's like, I mean, Sanderson's such a big name, I can't be too harsh on it. And I think it's possible. I think Sanderson might be in the fantasy space kind of like what we've seen with Sarah J. Maas in the past, where I think sometimes people's feelings are less about the works and more about what they feel like everybody else thinks about the works, and that impacts how they talk about them. That's it though for the Unpopular Opinions 2.0 tag. I'll have all these questions in the description bar in case you want to answer any of them yourselves, or if you want to bounce off of anything I said, feel free to do so. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later.